Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos Otero. I am a senior program manager in the Excel team. Let me just...
1, 2.
There's my Twitter handle if you want to learn a little bit more about what I do and a little bit more about my background. Today I'm really honored and excited to be moderating a panel discussion with a few representatives from the Excel leadership team. As we heard during the keynote presentation yesterday, Excel is one of the most widely pieces of software in the world. And in fact, Excel is the most widely used BI and analytics tool in the world. So I imagine that is one of the reasons why you guys are here today. With this context, there's 3 things I'd love to achieve today. One is give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek into how we think about the world, how we think about the world of data, of analytics, and a little bit about what our strategy is when we think about Excel. 2 is give you a little bit of context as to where Excel fits into the narrative of what you've been hearing about this week, if you think about all of the BI analytics assets at Microsoft. And then 3, and hopefully most importantly, make sure that we're answering any top-of-mind questions you have. I've been collecting some questions from the community through social channels, as well as through the conferences. So I'll build some of those into the panel discussion, but we'll also open the mics towards the second half of the presentation or of the session to have a Q&A session. So start thinking about questions that you might want to ask. Before we jump into the discussion, I wanted to briefly introduce the panel. We have a fantastic set of panelists today representing a really diverse set of experiences, both within the Excel team, outside of the Excel team, within Microsoft, and also outside of Microsoft. First up, we have Liska Rutherford. She is representing the marketing team. Her team is responsible for marketing for Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, as well as the marketing experience for Office 365. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I was preparing for this session and talking with Liska was how much she loves Excel. And I know that she loves Excel because prior to joining the Excel team, she used to work in the Xbox team, and she literally said, you know, like, Xbox is great, I love gaming, but Excel is even better. Excel is even sexier. So I'm sure a lot of people here, share that feeling. Next up, we have some representatives from the engineering side of the house. We have Ludo Hoduk, and he is in charge of the engineering team for data visualization investments, as well as our analytics investments in Excel. One of the things that Ludo mentioned that he loves about Excel, and one of the reasons why he came to the team, prior to that he was working and managing the project team, the MS project team. And one of the things that he mentioned that he really admired about Excel is the passion and the creativity of the community. And one of the ways in which he saw that when he was in project is really the flexibility of Excel in the community, recreating a lot of the features that project has with the native features in Excel, with extensibility and with add-ins and macros and whatnot. So it's really a testament, maybe a little bit problematic for the project team, but really a testament to the power of Excel, the flexibility. Next we have Andrew Warden. He's also a representative from the engineering team. His team is in charge of some big investments we have right now. One is the collaboration investments for Excel, and 2 is the investments we're doing around making sure that we can have a really quick release cycle for our desktop endpoints. Like many of you here, including myself, Andrew is a recreational spreadsheet user. In his free time, he has built a Sudoku solver using iterative calc in Excel. So if any of you guys are fans of Sudoku or have any Sudoku problems that you want help with, make sure to connect with Andrew. And last but not least, we have David Gaynor. He's representing the program management discipline. The program management team in Excel is really responsible for setting the strategy for the product and really defining what capabilities and what features will make it into the product over time, and then working with our partners in design and user research to design these experiences. One of the things that I found interesting when talking with Dave when preparing for this session was really his framing around how sometimes seemingly small features in Excel that we work in on our end have an incredible impact on the world and on real users around the world. One particular example he cited was this accountant he met, I think in the UK, that really mentioned that some features that we released for Excel 2007 really essentially changed his career and helped him be more productive. So that's a little bit of background on the panel. Let's jump into some of the discussion. And like I said, I have a few questions that I've prepared, and then we'll open up the mics for Q&A towards the second half of the session. So as many of you know here, the Excel turned 30 years last year. So in May of 1985, in a room in New York, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were announcing Excel 1.0 on the Mac, so 30 years ago. And like I said earlier, Excel is the most widely used BI tool in the world. So my question for the panel is, and maybe Dave, you can help answer this, is what have been some of the key pillars and the key components of Excel's strategy to achieve this level of success?
Sure. Is this working? Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I've got, who was in Rob Colley's sessions this morning? Anyone? Okay, so those of you, I'm going to repeat a bit of something he said, because I think it's something we say, but I really like the way he said it, but I want to make sure I gave the attribution. But I'll start off with sort of a geeky way that I use to sometimes explain why Excel's like it is to executives higher up in our company, which is it's kind of an unusual piece of software, right? So what do you do with Word? You write a document. What do you do with PowerPoint? You make a slide and put it on a screen. And I love those apps, but what do you do with Excel? You do anything you want. It's like this horizontal tool that can solve any problem in the world. You can literally do anything. And so, you know, what it means is sort of people have got their hands on it, and over 30 years they've figured out how to apply it to any problem in the world. And it's just sort of a, you know, the geeky way I used to explain it is it's a functional programming language for non-technical people. So Excel's a programming language, but it's one that, you know, anybody can pick up and use. And so the way that Rob put it is, you know, it's a tool that can do anything that business people can learn. You know, some small set of business people might learn R or Python or SQL or, you know, some other very complicated thing to try and do that. But most of us, you know, don't sort of have necessarily the time to go invest in that. But with Excel, I can pick things up and I can solve almost any problem. And so I think that's a big part of it is sort of it's been designed in such a way that it's broadly applicable to almost anything. And we see wild things in it. You know, you go look at people running their houses, but if you go to Wall Street and you go to one of the buildings where all the big investment banks are, you will literally, you know, see 5 floors with hundreds of people on each floor, and they have 6 screen workstations, and 4 of those screens will be Excel, and 2 of them will be real-time data feeds. And basically, every bank is in a building trying to outsmart the other bank, and they're doing it all in Excel because it's the fastest and most flexible way to get things done. If you go to Boeing, you'll see them optimizing factory floors. We were in Charles de Gaulle Airport once, and we saw them building a simulation of traffic flow through the airport to try and figure out the bottlenecks to, you know, commission construction projects to get rid of those things. So literally, you know, the kind of stuff we scale, it's amazing. And it's one of the most, you know, Carlos asked why we like working on this product. It's incredibly fulfilling to just go see everything people do with the product. One thing we hear a lot from Excel customers, and I think some people find this a bit counterintuitive because you open up Excel, what is it? It's a grid. But we find Excel customers, when we do user research, saying this tool allows me to be creative, right? So you get these people, you know, in businesses, in schools, in industries, and it allows them sort of a creative outlet because they can sort of create solution to their problems. So that's sort of one long-winded statement around that. I think the other thing I'd say is I think the team has done a good job over the 30 years of extending a product in a way that's useful but also self-consistent. And you know, we're probably all familiar with pieces of software where you grab a piece of software when it's new and it does something really well and it's easy to use, and then as it grows up and people add more and more functionality to it, it gets confusing, it gets inconsistent, this piece doesn't work like that piece. And I think with Excel, the team, and you know, it's one of these things, when you work on the Excel team, you're working on something sort of bigger than you are because it's 30 years old and there's no one left on the team that was working for that long. We've done a really good job of extending the product in ways that feel very natural. So for somebody that learned it 10 years ago, they can, you know, take advantage of the new stuff we added last week, but it's in a way that they sort of don't have to relearn, and it's very enjoyable to use. So how's that?
Great. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, there's just another sort of more practical example. My older brother runs a door and window shop in California. And if you said, what are the 5 most important things you use to run your business? Like 3 of them are pieces of equipment, like a planer or a truck or something. And 2 of them are pieces of software, QuickBooks and Excel. So it's awesome. Like Dave gave a bunch of sort of, I don't know, big iron examples. But there's also just, you know, for each one of those, there's 500,000 or 1 million little examples of people like my brother who are actually like, you know, serving the Central Coast area with doors and windows. And that's cool too.
And also, like Carlos was saying earlier, I spent a chunk of time in my career working on the project team, and one of the running jokes we had on the project team was that the largest competitor for Microsoft Project was Excel. And I'm sure that many products out there, QuickBooks probably is one of them, also regard Excel as their largest competitor. And I think it highlights, kind of to pick on some of the points that they've made, the time to empowerment using a product like Excel is very, very quick. There's a lot of software out there that make you feel very stupid before you earn the right to at some point start feeling mildly competent, right? And I'm thinking about, you know, Microsoft Project. I'm thinking about Photoshop or a large complex piece of software that really take a long time to master. But the time to feeling pretty good about yourself when you start working with Excel is pretty quick. And at the same time, the depth and the richness of functionality once you start digging deeper and deeper is seemingly endless at the same time. So it's both the ease of use, ease of discovery, ease of empowerment, and the depth and complexity and richness that, in my mind, makes it incredibly compelling.
So it's got the rewards model of Candy Crush, but it's got a lot more headroom.
Love the way you put it.
Another angle that I think is interesting to explore as we think about the success of Excel, but really looking forward, is Excel in the context of Office, right? I think a big part of Excel's success could be attributed also to the tight integration and interoperability with the rest of the Office suite. So Liska, maybe you can help us understand a little bit about Excel in the context of Office and some of the key pillars of the strategy for Office as we look forward.
Sure. So we were just talking about the last 30 years of Excel and the fact that Excel has been around for 30 years and the fact that it has such a huge base of customers is one of our biggest strengths, but it's also super important that we not just rest on that and that we're moving forward and things are moving so quickly. We want to make sure that we are continuously, innovating, because the way that people are working now is far different than the way that we used to work even 5 years ago. So there are 3 key areas where we're really focused across all of the Office applications. One really is mobility, and this feels obvious for a lot of us, but what's really key for us within Office is recognizing that most people have multiple devices. Often they've got multiple platforms. You might have a Windows device and an iPhone or an Android, and we want to make it really easy for people to easily move from one device to another. So it's really all about making sure that there's a consistent Office experience, a consistent Excel experience across those devices, and you can just pick up where you left off is one key area. So having that great cross-platform, cross-device experience is something that we've really been investing in. We made a huge amount of progress in the last year. The second area is around collaboration. And that is, collaboration's always been important. It is increasingly important, especially today, especially as millennials become a greater part of the workforce, and they are used to having very real-time, collaboration all throughout school. So we're also really focused on how can we make it easier for groups of people to work together on a project, on a document. And so that's where you saw with 2016, we're investing in real-time co-authoring. We have said it's coming in Excel. I'm sure this is an area that has been frequently requested. So, but it's beyond just working in a document at the same time. It is knowing what is happening across your project. And there are a lot of areas where we're investing quite a bit in the area of collaboration. And the third one that really resonates for Excel in particular, I would say, is this idea of intelligence. And it's in how can we apply intelligence to make your job easier, because everyone has more to do now typically than they did even 5 years ago. So expectations have risen. How can we make people's job easier is one thing that we're working on quite a bit. So with PowerPoint, we're doing that with PowerPoint Designer, which can actually create beautiful slides for you. With Excel, with the 2016 launch, we launched one-click forecasting, where you can basically just highlight a row of cells and it will automatically create a forecast for you. So maybe for a lot of people in this room, you want to do your own forecasting model because you already, you're experts in this area, but someone running, say, a small business isn't necessarily an expert. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we help you do even better work with less time than you have previously.
Any other thoughts on this? Okay. So another theme that we've heard throughout this conference, and I hear a lot from the community, is really the excitement around the rapid pace of releases and innovation that's coming out of the Power BI team. People love that. People think that's a fantastic model. So what is the equivalent of that in the Excel team? Can we expect to see that same pace of innovation coming out of the Excel team?
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at it, and you guys can jump in. One of the sort of fundamental shifts that's going on in sort of our internal engineering team is, if you go back a few years, the number of days between when we would do some work and when you would typically see it might be like 500 or 1,000. And so to like pretend that we would actually know what your feedback might be, or that after 500 or 1,000 days, we could have the same people pick that up in some kind of real-time time machine thing and apply it, is sort of crazy. But now that we're in a world where we're dividing that by 10, it might be 50 days, it might be 100 days, and we're getting better and better at that. And so we can literally have the people who are designing something this week get it out to you, 4 weeks from now. You can be giving us real-time feedback, whether that's through customer voice, so you're actually typing stuff somewhere and telling us, or we just have telemetry that's watching what you're doing, and we're seeing whether you're being successful or not. We're seeing whether you're using it or not. We're seeing whether we're sort of achieving our user goals. The folks on my team are super excited to sort of close that loop, because it gets you back to what you experienced when you were working on your computer science degree. Like, you worked on something, you sat down next to somebody and you built it, and then you said, hey, does it work? And it worked. And like, it was hours later, and it gets us much closer to that experience with all of you. And so it's totally transforming a bunch of internal things in terms of how we engineer, which is probably not super exciting to you. But I think the thing that is super exciting to you is that it's going to totally close the loop in terms of when we do something, when we get the feedback, how quickly we respond, and how quickly you see the sort of results of that.
Fantastic. So maybe building on that, Dave or Liska, can you help us understand a little bit of the customer-facing aspect of that? So what can customers expect to see? Maybe talk a little bit about the subscription model and how we're moving to that from a business perspective and a customer-facing perspective.
Sure, maybe I'll talk. Is this working? They gave me that mic, so I felt I should speak. Just make use of it. Maybe I'll talk about the customer-facing bit, and then if Liska wants to talk about the business, that'd be great. How many people here are using Excel 2016? And how many of those people are on the subscription model versus the perpetual model? Okay, so about half the room already knows this. We, in our terms, we ship monthly, and what that means is for Excel, whether it's on the Mac or Windows or your iOS or whatever, what have you, we put out a new version every month. And what that allows us to do is put new stuff in every month. And so, we released 2016 sometime last fall formally, and in the old days, that would be it for 2.5 years. But since then, we've already put in a bunch of new features. And so, now you're probably getting a dialogue showing up once in a while saying what's new when it lists some new features. We've added another visualization. We've added a lot of functions. That one's been incredibly well received. We sort of track what happens with these things, and news of new functions in Excel travels the globe really, really quickly, which just tells you something about the Excel user base. And so from a customer perspective, just, every month new stuff will show up. Some months it'll be big, some months it'll be small, some months it'll be in between, but you can just expect the product to get better. So we sort of detached in some way the version number from delivery of functionality. It's interesting, building Excel, so we've got, somewhere between 450 and 500 million monthly active users, I think is our current estimate. When people ask about how do you decide what to do, I say, the analogy I was given once, and I think it works, is it's kind of like trying to make a pizza for 500 million people. So how do you make a pizza that 500 million people will like? I bring this up to say it's been interesting now that we've gotten in this mode what's happened, which is certain enterprises who want lots of stuff quickly, you start giving it to them, they pop up and say, well, hang on a minute. If you're changing the product every month, that creates sort of some new stresses on us, and it's good for the users, but now users need to understand. So we've sort of got this branch that comes out monthly, and then for certain enterprises, we've got this, I won't get the marketing term right, but basically you can sort of take changes every quarter as opposed to every month to have it a little bit slower. But basically, the goal long term, the way I say it is, we want people just to think of this as Excel and it gets better, and that you stop even thinking about a version number, because that's sort of very 1990s computing, and the world we want to live in is just it's a tool and it gets better. And it gets better, like Drew said, not because I thought up a good idea, but because we're actually sort of measuring what users are doing, and if we're making changes to the product, it's making them faster, more successful, fewer errors, what have you. So telemetry is a big part of it.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I've been at Microsoft for about 10 years, worked on several products. What's really just amazing with everything Dave said is that this is a huge change from where we have been. And even within Office, it's a big change from where we were, say, a year ago. where since September we have been shipping on a monthly basis. And one of the things that's really been great about that is it has definitely made us more agile and able to respond to customer feedback. So I've been in situations with the engineering team where we get some customer research to show that there's a lot of interest in one particular feature, and we've been able to prioritize that and get that out fairly quickly, which has just been really exciting. So I feel like we're now in a place where we can be much more responsive than we have been. And then also with this monthly model, and it's great that so many of you are on that Office 365 subscription. And for those of you who are with Home and Personal, there is now too an Office Insider program, which is a great opportunity too to get in and to where you can get the releases. You'll be one of the first customers to actually get those releases. And that also is one thing that we're doing as we're really, when we're rolling out, we're starting first with a really engaged customer base that's excited to get the first set of products, and then we're able to then take that feedback before we're rolling out more broadly to production. So it's been a huge change.
Great.
So can I say one more thing
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with the question that was asked, but it's a good time to say it. Who's been to the Excel user voice site? Okay, a few of you, wonderful. We are trying to increasingly direct, everybody that wants to give us input or feedback or feature requests to that site, because if we can get the whole world of Excel users sort of going there, putting their ideas in and voting other people's ideas, it's sort of one wonderful place where the community can sort of participate, see what's going on, tell us what they'd like to see, and we can sort of see how things turn out. And then that increasingly is going to drive our engineering investment. So I just want to make sure that everybody, I said in every session we should evangelize this thing, and so please go take a look, let us know your thoughts, and please tell every Excel user you know in the world that if they want to talk to the Excel team, that's the place to go.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Yeah. So I want to anchor back to one of the points that Liska made earlier around the pillars of the Office strategy, one of which is mobility. And Ludo, perhaps you can help us understand a little bit of what Excel is doing in this space. What is the strategy when we think about cross-platforms, different OSs?
Well, it was working, but anyways, I guess not. When we think about cross-platform, we think about literally giving our users the value of Excel wherever and whatever device they choose to use. And so for us, it's really about choice, and it's really about reaching out to our customers, regardless of the platform of choice, or regardless of the form factor or the modality that they're currently leveraging. So for us, it's a huge area of investment. We're doing a lot of work on the engineering side to move as much code as possible to a shared environment where we contribute to the broader code base regardless of the platform. So there's a lot of engineering transformation. There's a lot of transformation from the point of view of how we think about features too. We sometimes think about mobile experiences or the mobile versions of our apps as a smaller, simpler version of the big brother version of the apps, which usually is the desktop version. But we like to think of it slightly differently. We like to think of mobile endpoints or mobile devices offering capabilities that in fact are uniquely available on mobile devices. The availability of things like a camera, like a GPS sensor, like an accelerometer, actually give birth to new ideas and new capabilities, new functionality that would make no sense or would be very impractical on a regular form factor such as a desktop or a laptop. So we think about cross-platform, again, not just as a transcription or a translation of an existing version of the software that exists maybe on a desktop form factor into a smaller, less capable, but instead as an opportunity to reach out and generate new scenarios and deliver new and unique value to our users so that they continue using an experience that they're familiar with. It's still Excel or Word or PowerPoint, but they have the ability to leverage the capabilities that a mobile device is uniquely able to deliver to them. So that's kind of the framework that we're thinking about mobility, and it's clearly also in terms of growth opportunity and reach. This is the area where we're targeting as kind of the growth engine moving forward for our user base. So.
Any other perspectives?
It's hard for me not to say something about this topic. You could sit there and think, oh, this is some sort of papering over something. No, this is like a deep core engineering thing. When we deliver Excel across endpoints, it needs to be authentically Excel, and it also needs to very much feel like the platform that it was built for. So when you have your iPad and you're using Excel, it should feel like an iPad app. and it should take, as Ludo said, it should take advantage of the capabilities of that device. And if you're on your Android phone, it should feel like an Android app. And if you're on your Windows, platform, it should feel like a Windows app. And so we have invested lots of engineering time making sure that we can build this shared code, and then sort of you can think of the abstraction layers either being at the bottom, file I/O network, auth, graphics, or at the top, a bunch of the Chrome and the way people interact and sort of the widgetry. But it's a big deal from an engineering standpoint, and we fundamentally believe that delivers a better experience than some least common denominator solution. That's a sort of a fundamental core belief from an engineering standpoint.
Great, thank you. The next question is one that I probably should have started with. When I went out and asked on Twitter and LinkedIn, social media, for ideas for questions for this session, most of the questions that came back were around extensibility and VBA. And I have at Dory Owen and at Petros essentially asking, one, what is the plan with VBA? Is VBA is going to continue to be supported? And two, what is the overall strategy for the extensibility and programmability space?
Well, I can start taking a crack at it. I also had the opportunity a few years ago to spend time in the Office extensibility team, and so this is definitely a topic that's that I care a lot about. I think we introduced VBA, 25 years ago now. It was a revolution at the time in terms of making Office not just a set of very powerful end-user focused tools, but a platform for developers to add their own innovation, their own IP on top of, and take advantage of the capabilities of Office together with their own imaginations, innovation, and deliver something unique. So the programmability or extensibility aspect of Office is absolutely critical to how we've won, how we've grown, and is definitely a big part of how we will continue growing and succeeding as an organization and a set of products. VBA was synonymous until recently with Excel, Word and PowerPoint's extensibility. It was, and of course many other products like Project and so forth. A few years ago we introduced a new modality for how we would allow developers to extend Office, and we called it Office add-ins, which is essentially a way to introduce, as part of the Office canvas, the ability to insert add-ins that would take advantage and extend the capabilities that are available within the boundaries of the product. That allowed a creation of unique experiences. We have a store experience around it. We saw a lot of interest from the developer community to publish apps that would be not just deeply integrated with the product, but also, and maybe more importantly, cross-platform. And so one of the design points when we started working on the Office add-in extensibility framework was to take a cross-platform approach to creation of add-ins, where an add-in would be created once and would be able to run on any platform, such as mobile platforms like we were discussing earlier. That's another example of where we're taking the ecosystem and the extensibility further to give more flexibility and open the door to more scenarios for our developer ecosystem. We keep hearing about new needs, new emerging needs in the realm of extensibility. Just, I think recently we did a Reddit AMA, Ask Me Anything, with the Excel team. And one of the top requests was Python integration in Excel. So clearly, I mean, I don't know if anyone was familiar with the Reddit AMA or if anyone has heard about some heads shaking. So it is, there's a constant need and expectations from the community of Excel users to be able to do more with Excel. Excel being kind of the centerpiece or the center of gravity, but also being able to add their own capabilities, either written as VB add-ins or as the AMA showed us very loudly, using new technologies or emerging technologies such as Python. We heard about R integration as being a huge area of interest. So yes, it is and continue to be an area where we feel this is a unique value for Office, and maybe particularly for Excel. Excel being an area where we're seeing most of the energy behind the developer ecosystem in Office.
Just to go back to one specific aspect of that, which is a core to the question of a bunch of people in Twitter, is are we continuing to support VBA?
We're absolutely continuing to support VBA. In fact, when we started designing the Office add-in experience I explained earlier, the goal, the design goal, was to do it in a way that was absolutely complementary with VBA extensibility. This is one key aspect of our extensibility experience, and we're continuing to invest in VBA. Any new capability that we build in the product is exposed as part of our object model. This is absolutely a critical part of how we are moving forward the platform. And it is happening in the context of the broader extensibility experiences that I was discussing earlier, but we are absolutely continuing to invest in VBA.
Another area that there's some confusion with our customers, and I've heard this on social media and different conferences, including this conference, of which the big focus is BI, Power BI, and some of the new investments we're doing in this space, is where does Excel fit in the narrative of Power BI and the broader context of Microsoft BI tools? Let's start with Power BI. Maybe Dave, you can help us understand where you see Excel and Power BI Service and Power BI Desktop fitting.
Sure. Again, I think anybody that was in one of Rob Colley's sessions this morning, he had a very good set of slides that I think he'd actually sketched out by hand, the ones that had sort of green people on them. But it was sort of juxtapositioning, you know, in the old days, so this is sort of pre-Power Pivot, Power Query, you could have lots and lots of people solving business problems in Excel, and so there was a lot of speed there. Or you could have, you know, a high degree of control because somebody would have spent, you know, 50 million putting in some rarefied BI system they had a smaller number of licenses to, and a few special analysts would sort of would be allowed to sort of, you know, work there and then disseminate information to the organization. And so you sort of had these two different worlds. And, you know, what he said is you had to choose between sort of speed and control, and organizations always chose speed. Why? Well, back to where this started. People know Excel, they love Excel, they can solve any problem in Excel, so that's going to be the default place for most, you know, most business people, because they understand their business, they understand all the trade-offs. Excel's a tool that allows them to model that, so that's what they're going to go do, and they'd be sort of the BI guys that are, you know, a few of them that had surprisingly little impact in the business because the business decision makers were all in Excel. And so fast forward to today, what we're doing and what we've been doing since 2010 is saying, you don't actually need to compromise those things, right? With sort of modern Excel and the modern tooling, you can, you know, easily get enterprise data sources in there. You can easily model them. You can do the analysis, build the reports, build the dashboards you need, share them, and, you know, we've got things like server versions of all these products now where you know, if you want to control them and have one version of something to look at, it's very easy for an end user to do that. Again, you don't even need really IT involvement anymore. And so that's sort of the revolution we're trying to bring about, which is say the business people can do all their data work. You know, we have this phrase that I think we borrowed from Gartner, sort of, you know, citizen data scientists. We've heard about data science, and it's a bit of a buzzword these days. Apologies to anyone that has the title data scientist, but I've noticed more and more people do. But that sort of implies somebody that's working in R and, you know, Python and doing programming to solve problems. And what sort of our view of the world is there will always be a need for that, but what we want to do is perpetually make it possible in tools like Excel to get most of the benefit with, you know, far less time and far lower demand for specialized skills. And again, that will just keep Excel relevant, and it also is what people want out of their tools. And so we want Excel to, you know, feel that niche. Now, Excel at the end of the day is a spreadsheet, and so it does a lot of things really nicely. It's approachable. You can blend structured and unstructured. You can lay things out how you want them, and even if you have a data model, you can sort of use formulas to reference that data model, and you can lay things out in very, you know, unstructured fashion. It's good for sort of doing certain sort of analysis and simulation, so it's good for what a spreadsheet is. At the same time, there's other tools like Power BI that are very good for sort of doing very visual drag and drop visual analytics and visual reporting. And it's the kind of thing where Excel has charts, Power BI has charts. You know, the analogy I always use is PowerPoint has charts and Excel has charts. Nobody gets confused about those tools. I sort of see it the same way, which is Excel is a spreadsheet, Power BI is a visual analytics product. They're very, very complementary. And one of the things we've done, and we've been sort of stressing this at the conference, is made sure that the underlying engines are the same. And so they both use the same sort of Power Pivot modeling technology. They both use Power Query. But then what you do with the, you know, the data in it is very different. What you do in the spreadsheet versus an analytics product is quite different. And so I guess at the end of the day, we believe they're sort of tools that, you know, all IWs can and will use in their workplace, and to the extent we sort of make it such that if you learn one, you know 70% of the other, you make it very easy to go back and forth. But that at the end of the day, all Power BI users will use Excel for their spreadsheet needs, and that's sort of how it should be. Now, I don't know, maybe we should, I'll stop there, see if that made sense. I see some head nods.
Yeah, and actually at this point, I have a few more questions that I've collected from the community, but at this point I wanted to open it up to the group and see if there's any questions that anyone wants to ask. I'm happy to keep going with some of the questions I've collected. Yeah.
A question about the Excel Online. It's been impressive with Excel Online catching up with some of the feature compatibility. But I'm just curious, is that going to follow a similar trend to Cloud First, like some of the server products have, or should we always expect it to be sort of a subset of Excel?
Sure, did everyone hear the question, or should I repeat it? Okay, so I think the question was essentially Excel Online. I think there was actually two questions, maybe. One is it something that's going to go cloud only? You know, Power BI, the service is something that you can only get in the cloud currently.
Cloud First.
Cloud First. And I think there's a second question about functional equivalency with the other Excels. Is that a fair way? So to answer the first question, we're going to continue to release Excel Online in a cloud fashion, you know, as quickly as we can. And in fact, that one will soon be shipping weekly. So we will be updating that thing weekly. And so if you sort of want the fastest access to, you know, our web delivered stuff, that would be the place to go. But we still do sell this thing called WAC Server. It's a very exciting name. I don't even know what it stands for, but it's basically Word, Excel, and PowerPoint on a server version that you can deploy inside your enterprise. And it works in conjunction with SharePoint, but it's separate from SharePoint. We did that intentionally so that if you have some version of SharePoint, you want to upgrade your web apps more frequently, you can. So we'll release those periodically. I think we literally just released a new version of it last week. Am I right? Yes. We'll call it right, yes. Last week, 2 weeks ago. And you know, we'll upgrade. So you know, the way you can think of it is, the web is going to get better every week, and on some periodic basis, we'll take a snapshot of that code and ship it in a way that enterprises you can use internally. And we'll keep doing that as long as people are interested in having both experiences. On the functional equivalence point, it's an interesting question because there's a lot of reasons we end up building a version of Excel for the web. One is there's just a group of people that want to work that way. There's a technology company that I don't think I can name, but they phoned us up and said, you know, we want to do all this stuff on the web. Can you show us how? And we said, well, you have a license to the Office apps. And the next thing was, yeah, but a lot of our people are young and they use Macs. And we said, well, it's okay, we have Mac Office. And it was, well, no, they're really young and they just like working in the browser. So there's a segment of our users that just like that. There's, you know, lots of other scenarios. There's a lot of BI professionals and Excel professionals, you know, at this conference. And they've got a need that we see a lot, which is I build a report, I want to stick it somewhere where I can show it to people, but they can't change it, they can't mess with it. I know there's only one version. Turns out a web rendering of Excel is a wonderful thing to do there. And so, you know, those tend to be very pivot and data heavy. And so there's a lot of different reasons what we as a team try and do, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that aren't easy to deliver in a browser. So, you know, Power Pivot loading up 100 million rows of data, and you doing intense analytics on it, not really suited to that sort of environment currently. Maybe 10 years from now when the internet's different, it'll be. And so one of the things as a team we have to sort of figure out on an ongoing basis is what are we putting in the web version and why? And we sort of have two big use cases. One is what we, you know, our working title is basic use, but just people that want to work in a browser and do spreadsheeting stuff. And so there it's sort of just, you know, we look at things and we try and gauge demand based on what they're using in the core product, what we get on user voice, things like that, customer feedback, talking to enterprises and sales calls, and we just, you know, add features that we think are, you know, the next set people want to see in there. And then we have this other thing, which is more of what I'd call the business intelligence scenario, which is a very different feature set, right? Because people just doing basic spreadsheet work aren't probably using, you know, slicers tied to a big complicated model, but, you know, in the BI world they are. So we tend to have these two reasons we invest. Will we catch up eventually? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty complex topic just because, you know, delivery of something as complex as Excel entirely to the browser is, you know, probably more of a computer science problem than anything right now. But we certainly, it's important, we are investing in it, we continue to invest more in it, and sort of those are the two ways we think about it.
Maybe one last thing to say on the one last thing on the engineering side of that conversation, which kind of picks up on the mobile and cross-platform conversation we had a little bit earlier. The way we view it from an engineering standpoint, the web is another endpoint. And as we are driving towards having more and more of our code base shared into a single repository that serves any endpoint where Excel runs, the web is one of these endpoints. And we've done a lot of work over the last few months and years and increasingly over the last few months to move more and more of that code base on the web as well, where hopefully at some point in the future when a new feature pop up on one of the endpoints, it also pops up on the web. Then comes the next round of questions to Dave's point where, okay, now do we want it to show up and in what form on the web compared to other endpoints? But from a technical standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, we're increasingly in a position where things are developed once and potentially can be lit up on any endpoint, the web being one of them.
I'll speak loud. First, thank you for keeping the keyboard shortcuts of 2003 still active. I hope that continues. About the ribbon and the paths to success, in 2007, I think you introduced the ribbon, and you've driven it across different platforms. How is that going? I know as a power user, sometimes I get confused by it. I find it so-so as a success and not, depending on the perspective. And also, are you driving any voice activation for finding that menu setting that you know is there, but you can't find it? Are you considering anything for making power users who sometimes use functionality that is rarely used and cannot find it and spend 5 minutes looking for something that could be done maybe with natural, pure language in a few minutes or in a few seconds before it is?
Sure. I think there's about 5 questions there. So maybe I'll repeat them as I go, and if I miss some. So I think one was actually a statement, which is thanks for keeping the keyboard shortcuts. You and I need to exchange business cards after this because the people that designed the ribbon thought I was being crazy when I said, you know what, the Excel people need their shortcuts. Quick story. If you go to Wall Street, a lot of the banks actually make their analysts work only with keyboards for the first couple months because it's so much faster once you learn the shortcuts, and they also take off the F1 key because it gets in the way. And so yes, lots and lots of Excel users use the keyboard shortcuts, and in fact we're busy putting some of those into the web app because we've been getting feedback saying, I just tried this on the web and it doesn't work, what's up guys? So there's that. How is the ribbon going? The design point of the ribbon quickly was, we had essentially we had this, I don't know, I'll call it 1,000 units of functionality, and the menu system that we had at the time was designed in the early 90s and allowed us to expose about 3% of that in a way that was sort of discoverable, and the rest was up to the power user to go to classes, buy books, learn, what have you. And so the ribbon was an attempt to say we'd actually like to uncover 50% of the functionality and make that front and center, and do a lot of things along the way again with a goal of efficiency, right? So now you can create a chart and in one click make it look like you wanted, whereas if you go back to Excel 2003, it would take 50 clicks or you just wouldn't bother. And so I think from those perspectives, design point was realized. The feedback we get is generally positive, and sort of the measurements we did, I can't, I'll try and draw this chart in the air, but what we found is you gave Excel or, frankly, any of the applications to a new user, and for the first couple of weeks, their productivity would decline a bit because there's this new system and they have to figure it out. But what we measured is in most cases, I think within 6 weeks, they'd be doing the same tasks far faster than they had been. And so it was a classic learning curve thing, and that was something we studied a lot, we had a lot of data on, and we decided it was worth the trade-off, and we did it. That was your second question.
Voice activation.
Voice activation. Okay, so this is a great one. So if you have Excel 2016 or any of the Office apps, there's this feature that internally we call Oz, but you'll see a little box up in the ribbon that sort of says, what do you want to do? And what you do is you go type what you want to do in there, and it's actually a wonderful piece of technology that figures out if there's a command available and shows you how to do it. So if you could type in pretty much anything, it should give you a result. Part of the reason this is beautiful is because we record everything that's typed into that, and as this gets into the hands of millions and millions and millions of users, we start to get really good data for what people are looking for. Turns out in some cases they're looking for things we have, but we haven't wired things up correctly in the background with sort of our English language matching, so we have to go fix that, and then next time you search it'll be there. But also it shows us what people are looking for that we can't actually do yet. So it's another interesting point of product input, which is, we have a lot of people asking for these things. So it's there, and it's turning out to be interesting in a lot of ways. Accessibility, so helping people that sort of aren't, don't have a sight or something use the product. It turns out that's a very good gateway for them. Again, instead of having to sort of listen to the computer narrate through a menu system or the ribbon, they can just sort of express what they want to do, and then the command is taken there. And yeah, there's teams thinking about voice. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation in this area in the next year or two. And the cool part to me is it's all sort of service backed, and we measure everything. So we can make it better sort of every month, again, getting back to that, because we know what the whole world is doing with our product.
One of the challenges I have, I work with government clients almost exclusively, so all my clients are of diminished capacity of some sort. The challenge that I have in large organizations and Microsoft and these visualization tools that are coming along is that they're absolutely fabulous. But I can engage with people in Microsoft who desperately want to sell an enterprise license to the large organization, to the IT department. And I can find people like at these towards a conference that are very passionate about the product and these visualizations, which we need to tie to upper management in those government organizations. And I feel like I'm having to try to yank those people together to help me communicate this big story about data across these government agencies, which I think is what has to happen to them in order for this to grow down to the top and be engaged in things like Office 365, which is a fabulous idea, and it's hard to get in government if it grows up from IT rather than from upper management. Is that something you guys keep in your mind in terms of at a product level with Excel or Power BI that there's a communication, whether it's in my case government, that needs to be engaged to tell that story? As I've been through this conference, I think we've got a lot of nerds, including myself, which is great. But what's engaging the next step up? That's a long question. Answer whatever you feel like.
So I think that what you're saying is, hey, there are a lot of people within organizations who are really interested in some of the functionality that you can get in Office 2016, Office 365, but something's getting held up at the top with the people who are making the decisions around actually purchasing and deploying the right software. And, it's very interesting that you say that, because this is something that I've been talking about. It's a real problem for us from a business perspective. This is one of the top things that we are focused on. We do have a lot of companies where people have actually purchased it, but the challenge is, from an IT perspective, it is work. It is work to deploy the latest versions and get things going. So one of the things that we were talking about, I was in a meeting on this just last week, we're saying, hey, we need to somehow do a better job of really kind of harnessing the end users as well as the leads from different departments to really kind of put the pressure on IT and to really show, because I think they're only going to do it if the demand side of the equation is there. We've been doing a ton of work to make it as easy as possible, and it is work, but we're trying to reduce the friction from an IT perspective to make it easy for them to deploy the latest. We do need to get that demand side of that equation, on there. So what I will say to everyone in this room is, make sure that, if your organization is not on Office 365, if they haven't deployed, 2016, make your desires known, and then that is something too that we're working on from an office marketing side to make sure that we can do an even better job of communicating the benefits of doing so to both end users as well as the business decision makers within the organizations.
There's another question over here.
Can I just throw in one other thing there? And this is where I'm in engineering, not in marketing, so I'll preface it by that. And maybe I'll get in trouble later. But I think part of what we're trying to do on the Excel team is we see these really powerful stories. Who went to see the Cayman speech this morning? There was a really good one where he's talking about sort of rolling out stuff inside. Part of the punchline there is there was someone looking to solve a business problem, got a whiff of how Excel 2013 could do that, got a copy, deployed it, right? And that caused that organization upgrade. So it really was demand driven by sort of people that were responsible for running the financials of the business as opposed to some IT-led thing. And I think we see that repeated over and over and over, where somebody gets their hands on something and it changes, their job in a good way, and it creates internal pressure. So, Liska approaches it from one angle. On our team, I'm trying to get a lot of my team to frankly spend a lot of time out in the community, and we're trying to figure out better ways to do that to sort of make sure that the Excel and BI pros in the world understand what their modern capabilities are, because once they see they can sort of solve a set of problems far more quickly and easily than has historically been the case, or that they could previously do with more expensive tools, that creates an internal demand, which in some cases helps. The U.S. government is a particular case that, is not as easy as, maybe just a Fortune 5,000 company. But I think, part of the way that Excel became popular in the first place, and Lotus 123 was the enterprise spreadsheet of the day, is it did things that were sort of faster and easier and simpler. And it was brought in by end users more than brought in by IT. And so I think that's a powerful dynamic that we're always working on as well.
There was a question back there first. Yeah, sure.
Excel would have legacy issues. You might have a particular behavior of a function or something that's not ideal, but you can't change it because old spreadsheets depend on it or something like that. I'm just wondering if you had your time over and were being able to build the product again from scratch as new and not have to worry about this, what would you wish was done differently? So put another way, is there a particular thing in Excel now that you kind of just wish behaved differently, but you're constrained in fixing it because of legacy issues?
Wow. Okay, so this is a dangerous thing to ask engineers because you're describing a fantasy land that does not exist. It turns out that being able to open your files again the next time with the things that we release this month, that's important to you. And so we don't spend a lot of time going down fantasy land. But my team is thinking a lot about collab, and I clearly would not have the Excel file format as it exists today. It is a difficult thing to work around with from a collab standpoint. But that's like a fundamental part of the product. And it's not just about what we write to disk. It reflects a lot of the sort of internal structure and architecture of the product. And so, that's not remodeling or even like tearing down one room. That's like knocking the thing down to the studs and like going from scratch. And so that would be a big deal. But that's part of the fun of working on the product. We talked about Excel's 30 years old. Like, what other piece of software can you think of that's 30 years old and is still as relevant as Excel is today? That's part of the challenge. That's part of the draw to people that people love. That's why they want them to work on the team.
Yeah, I think we could go to the bar afterwards and spend 9 hours going through these things. Like, the gentleman next to you is Joe McDade. He's someone that has a history in financial modeling, and I'd say, VLOOKUP is just crazy, right? Anybody that learned VLOOKUP and they didn't come from sort of an engineering background is like some optional parameter. You can't ever really understand what it does. And so there's tons of stuff but how did we get that one? Well, we copied Lotus 123 because we needed to be compatible. How did they get that one? They copied, VisiCalc, which is sort of the first spreadsheet. So a lot of these things date back further than even Excel is the sort of strange thing. I have to tell you one story, because this is a great example of just how tricky it can be. So at some point in, I don't know, Excel 97, some bank phones up and says, I need recalc to be faster, because the banks always need to have these models that take hours to recalc. So give me something that allows me just to say these 10 cells can be recalc. So we add range.recalc and add it and forget all about it. And then a release later, some other bank phones up and says, this thing doesn't do what you think it does. What it does is it recalcs everything except that range. And so he said, that's no problem. We'll just fix that bug. So we fixed that bug and shipped some patch in the service release. And then a year later, another bank phones us up and says, you just broke thousands of our solutions. Because we figured out what it did, and we actually figured out a way to rely on that. And so, yeah, there's really literally nothing you put in the product that, it's one of the awesome parts about having 500 million users. If like 1/10 of 1% of your user base does something, you can fill up multiple football stadiums with those people. So you change it on them, and you got feedback.
What are the top 3 or 5 help requests from a learning perspective where people are trying to figure out how to do things with Excel that you guys see based on the
So the number one is VLOOKUP, right? And so I think it's not always expressed in those terms, but it tends to be, I have this data and I have this data and I'm trying to relate them. And so I think as long as I've worked on the product, that's been in the top couple. I think the others come and go. That said, you know, and we're currently thinking about actual new functions that can solve that problem. I think, you know, if you want to give me your contact information, I can answer the question a slightly different way, but I'm not sure we should sort of, unless it's really interesting to the group, we could spend 15 minutes on that one easily. But I think there's things the product can do, you know, like so people here this week have probably been exposed to Power Pivot in at least one of their sessions. A lot of the people that work with Power Pivot say, well, if you learn Power Pivot 90% of the time, you shouldn't need VLOOKUP anymore. And so I think sometimes the things we'd like you to go educate people about might not be exactly the same things as what people ask about, if that makes sense. But, you know, happy to have a conversation. Okay, thanks.
And I think we're at time, but I'm sure we're willing to stay a few more minutes
yeah,
if
sure.
people have more questions. Yes. Sorry, Ludo, you want to say something?
No, I don't. I wanted to say that just to add to that. You know, it's not necessarily an answer to your question, but you know, on the topic of Power Pivot, when we present and demo Power Pivot to people who might not have been exposed to it, usually there's two sentiments that come up in the crowd. The first sentiment is amazement, and the second sentiment is anger. And anger by realizing that they had this thing all along, maybe, but just discovered it and discovered the power, depth, richness of it. And so I think, to your point, one aspect where and it kind of goes to what I said a little bit earlier when I said, you know, it's easy to get started and, you know, the time to empowerment is pretty short. And then there's this immense depth of features and capabilities, is the discoverability aspect of it, which I think we can probably never be done in making it easier for users to discover the right feature for them based on what they're trying to accomplish right now. And I think as we start learning more and more about intent and how people are using the product, and maybe through, you know, innovation around the ribbon maybe, and, you know, think of these things as a little bit more dynamic as opposed to fixed, that would kind of lend themselves to allowing discovery and usage of features when you need them, would be a good way to kind of lower the barrier of entry, discovery, and getting even more value out of the product. So.
There are a few more hands. Yeah.
Hi. So one of the primary tasks in my job is translating between analysts and business users. And of course, today, the number one way to do that is PowerPoint. Do you have any plans in the roadmap to make that more seamless, going between the two? I know that there have been a lot of improvements over the years, and there are, you know, 10 plus different buttons for ways that you can paste in PowerPoint, but it's not quite there. So
There's a whole area, I'm going to take a quick crack at it and then my colleagues can kind of pick up on that, but there's a whole area of what we call data-driven storytelling, which oftentimes start in Excel, but to your point, goes into the PowerPoint territory, into the Word territory, when we're trying to make that story something you can tell, share, and present. And it's a huge area of investment for us. We're thinking a lot about these scenarios. We've made a lot of improvements and innovation in the data visualization space with Office 16. If you've noticed, we've shipped a few new chart types. Last September, we just released another chart type about a week and a half ago. If you're on subscription and you've just updated, there's a new chart type called funnel charts, which, you know, is a big part of how we think about a data-driven storytelling, because it needs to be visual, it needs to be compelling, it needs to be able to get to the point and communicate the point quickly and easily, and visualizations are a great way to do that. And what better place to bring that experience than PowerPoint? So yes, we're thinking very, very hard about how to make that experience faster, how to integrate visualization and animations and all the niceties that you get in tools like PowerPoint, but also making visualizations more dynamic in the context of a Word document. Why not? So there's a lot of things going on that we are deeply thinking about. And so the only thing I would say is, to the point that Office is now something that evolves and grows more incrementally on a monthly basis, is stay tuned. And hopefully we'll have some things for you to find interesting.
I was going to say, this is another one where if you want to spend a few minutes talking afterwards, it might be good, because I have some other ideas, and I'd love to actually get a better understanding of what your pain points are, but Yeah.
So, apropos what she was saying, this morning I attended the SSRS presentation, and they talked about how you can now pin to PowerPoint. So, apropos, how much integration or coordination is there between the Office team and the SQL team? Because, you know, reporting services and SQL as back end and Power Pivot and the Pivot models seem to be growing to a point where they're starting to more significantly overlap. What kind of vision discussions are you guys having with those guys, and how integrated is that becoming, or is there any how much coordination is there?
Can you briefly repeat the question? Whoever wants to take it.
I think, so again, this is one where I want to make sure I answer the right question, which is, the question's about SQL Server reporting services and PowerPoint, which is where it started. But between all of this stuff, how much?
Talking about all of Excel and all of the presentation that you've got, and on the other side, we've got reporting services now.
Sure. So here's the honest engineering answer. Again, so you can all watch Liska's face. There's a ton of work going on, right? So one of the primary, I'm responsible Excel program management. I've got lots of friends over that work on Power BI and reporting services and analysis services, and they're friends, and a lot of them we've worked with for a long time. And so one of the primary things I spend time on is trying to make sure all this stuff lines up. So that's how I can come in here and say, Power Pivot, Power Query, they're going to be basically the same experiences wherever you go, whether you're in Excel or Power BI, and it's sort of Excel, you'll get the grid, Power BI, you'll get the charting stuff, but they're the same. Or at the end of the day, the Power BI service is a place that's going to treat, Power BI desktop files, SQL Server reporting services, and Excel content all in the same way. So, I don't know if you went to the session, but there was also a session on Excel and Power BI better together, and a lot of what was demoed there is you can now take an Excel file and pin the whole file or parts of the file or parts of a chart, or you can open things in Power BI up on Excel. So we do spend a ton of time talking through all these things. I won't say it's always perfect, and I think the one case you're calling out is there's, one of the beauties about Office is we made this thing sort of endlessly extensible, and we encourage it because, if a team, whether it's a Microsoft team or some external vendor, makes Office a more interesting place, it's more interesting for all of our customers, and that's net goodness. And so I think what you've discovered there is the reporting services people did a sort of publish to PowerPoint feature, and probably because they get asked a lot about it which is, you build a reporting services report, my exec wants it in PowerPoint, so can you make it easy to put in PowerPoint? Yes, we do. And then you look at it and say, okay, Excel pinned to PowerPoint, what happened there? And I would say that's probably one where, there's just a conversation that we didn't get on fast enough in that sense. So we spent a lot of time on it, a lot of moving pieces, not always perfect. But, the interesting thing to me is always, let's talk about what you're actually trying to accomplish, because I have a suspicion you're trying to move a table from Excel to PowerPoint, and that's where things are going sideways. And all the charts in the world, apologies, Ludo, aren't going to solve that. So to some degree, understanding specifically what you're after is helpful for us, because the other thing we don't want to do is go build something that's like what they built because we want to be consistent if there's not actually any end user demand for that, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
So I've got a question that maybe a double barrel question that ties into a couple of things that a lot of people have said here today. One of the things that we're hearing is a consistent theme around this whole conference, being modern BI, modern Excel, is taking a lot of new sensibility tools essentially. So we talked about VBA before. We've got DAX and Power Pivot, we've got M and Power Query. We're seeing R and Python getting pulled into Power BI. And from the Reddit comments, we hear that there's a lot of demand for Python, but at the same time, with 500 million Excel users, where only a fraction of those actually use Excel for anything more than a glorified calculator, it's pretty safe to say that the guys on Reddit are very similar to everyone else on Reddit, a very vocal minority of Excel users. One thing that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on is just generally, what do you think about the accessibility of all these cool new features in Excel when we consider that Excel is this really widely used business tool? are all these features still going to be usable for the everyday Excel user? Are they going to be able to take advantage of Power Pivot despite having to learn a brand new DAX modeling language to be able to actually unlock it and make the most of it? And secondary to that, then I know one reason that a lot of entities aren't using Power Pivot for modeling and forecasting purposes is because there's a lack of transparency and auditability around the DAX measures and how they're utilized. And so, combine that with the lack of accessibility, where the vast bulk of Excel users don't really understand or can't fathom how DAX works as a tool, that then limits the take-up of Power Pivot within organizations or for those purposes. So just keen to get your thoughts as to the direction of all these new languages that are coming into Excel, whether you think these are things that should become part of the everyday Excel user's toolkit, that they should be picking up DAX and M and R and Python and everything else, and how we're going to make those more transparent, more auditable, and easier for people to be able to just reconcile and say, yes, I can see this is working correctly because I understand how it works.
So we have some books up there for people that ask good questions. I think you just won the most questions in a single question. So, but anyone else that asks a question should come up and get a book too, because we forgot to be giving them out. So yeah, I think boy, there's a lot there. I'm not sure I can answer it in 2 minutes. It's a great question. I'd say a couple things. One is we deliberately try and design these things so you can dip your toe in the water without having to know anything new, right? And so to use Power Pivot, we always make sure you can get fairly far with nothing more than point and click. So Power Pivot's a nice example of I can go get some data sources wired up with one click. I can then relate them together with a quick drag and drop. Yes, I can go write DAX, and so on and so forth. And you come to a conference like this, and there are people demonstrating how to do this. But for sort of the 80% case, there's no reason. And so we're always mindful of, we're the tool that is 500 million people, because you don't have to become an expert to become dangerous. But we're going to make sure there's headroom there. So I think there's one statement, and Carlos was at some conferences in Australia a couple weeks ago, and I'll get the details wrong, but the gist of it is right, which is he was with an auditing company, and there was some gentleman who had spent a lot of time writing R or Python to try and sort of transform data, and then he bumped into Power Query and discovered he could do the same thing with just clicking, and the commentary was, if I can get the same thing done by clicking as opposed to writing a bunch of code, I always will, right? And so that's sort of, I guess point A is, that's always going to be our starting design point, which is simplicity, but backed with power for those people that care. There's a languages point you made, which is, DAX is sort of our end user one. The stuff that's underneath that runs the M engine, as the Excel, product leader, I would say DAX is where we're going to stop. You don't need to know any more about the M engine, and you shouldn't have to, right? So that's just one where we're only going to have so many languages we sort of expose people to. And the core ones we have are the formula language, VBA, and then DAX. And sort of anything else, is something that somebody really wants to pursue. The third thing I say is there's a lot of different, we call them scenarios, but we talk to a lot. And again, Carlos is doing, this is part of his full-time job, is sort of going to the world and saying, R, Python, machine learning, Excel, what does it mean? And interestingly, a lot of what we found there is not necessarily that people want to use those things in Excel. So there's not like, financial analysts saying, boy, I need me some R. What we found is it tends to be people that are doing work in those tools already that now need to share their results with other people that may not be data scientists. And so what they want is some way to say, here's the results of my analysis in Excel in a way that you can still change numbers and see things recalc, but it's in Excel because I know you have that tool, you know how to use it, you're comfortable with it, you know how to do your own what-if analysis. And so a lot of how we think about languages is not necessarily put it all in Excel because we need to check all the boxes. It's let's be thoughtful about the scenarios we want to enable, and let's sort of ground that in customer research and then build that. And so I think when we start to see our stuff come out from us, hopefully later this year, no pressure, Ludo, what you're going to get is something that allows data scientists to share their work with, other users in Excel in a way that's very, very comfortable for both of them, right? So a lot of the time the language question is more about, enabling users to just use Excel, and they shouldn't need to see the language. I don't know.
So I think we're way over time at this point. If anyone has any more lingering questions, feel free to come up and we can try to address them. Thank you.
And grab a book.